Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you today. I've got so many things I want to talk about today, but I think one of the things I'm going to focus on is time. And obviously some of these conversations, they come up because I was in a meeting or I was in a conversation, and I think it's something people should hear. And so if you got a pen today, I want you to write something down. Really important to know this, which is, we talk about wealth and Financial Evolution, my book is coming out. It'll be on Amazon shelves in a few months, but I'll have some copies coming up in a few weeks. And one of the things I talk about, and I've talked about on this podcast, is, wealthy people over time get their time back, right? And what ends up happening in retirement is that what happens is, because of the fact that way you've done, and it's kind of, believe it or not, it's not the best financial planning, your assets go down and so do your income over time. So while you have time, right, which is this thing you wanted to get, the problem is you're on this fixed budget. And so you can't really control what you get to do. And ideally what we'd want to do is get to what I call the stage 4 of wealth, which is this idea of that you've got time to be able to do the things and your assets and income are growing every year, right? So what's happening is when you have multiple companies, when you have, or one great company, pieces of real estate, stocks, bonds, all these different portfolios, all these different assets that are yielding passive cash flow, well, eventually you get time, right? And your assets are going up. All these assets are going up. The business valuation is going up. The real estate's going up. The stock portfolio is going up. And so we have things that what ends up happening over time create a greater amount of assets over a period of time, greater amount of income over a period of time. And what people realize is that time is the most important thing. And so time becomes this thing where, by the way, let me ask you this question. What would it take for you to own a building, a successful business, stocks, bonds, right? You have to do a lot of research. You have to do a lot of self-education. You have to do a lot to become the type of person who looks for those deals, attracts those deals, gets into those deals. So what ends up happening is that there's a lot of self-education along the way, and there's a lot of investment. Well, so now you're ready to write this down. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but I want you to think about this for a minute. Successful people, what they do is they spend money to save themselves time. Successful people spend money to save themselves time because they realize how valuable their time is. And so you start thinking about you're this individual who now owns these maybe multiple corporations or owns a very large corporation and owns real estate and has this knowledge base, right? You could be a full-time consultant on this issue if you wanted to at that point. And so your time becomes value. And I've talked about this on this podcast, is that your time becomes so darn valuable. Now, what do non-successful people do then? Right? What they end up doing is they try to save money. And so they spend time to save money. And if you're doing that, then what ends up happening is you're saying to yourself, well, I could mow my lawn, right? I could do that. I could save money, right? I'm the one, maybe if you're in a small dental practice and you're in your business, you're like, well, I can do QuickBooks myself, or I can do, this, I can work with the financials, whatever it ends up being, that you start saying, hey, look, I don't want to spend money on that. I don't want to spend money on that. So what I'll do is I'll spend my time. That's interesting. Like, what if I took that same amount of time, whether it be an hour, right? Whether it be, 2 hours, whatever it ends up being. Let's just assume that 1 hour per day. Let's just play this scenario out. And let's say on average of 1 hour per day, you decided you were going to make a switch. So you're going to switch, and I want you to really hang with me here. So let's assume on the average of 1 hour a day, you ended up doing something that you could have paid somebody else to do. And in that hour, you could have become self-educated. What I mean by that is you could have learned more on how to run your business successfully. You could have learned maybe something about financial investments, maybe read on, Ray Dalio's principles, or read something that helped you grow. And maybe it's in a clinical sense, or it starts to grow. So if we spent that 1 hour to grow and we paid someone to do that job that we could have done, well, you say, well, Eric, what's 1 hour a day? I mean, well, it's only 1 hour a day. And let's assume you even take a day or two off, right? And so you try to get an hour in, but most days it happened, but some days it didn't. So 5 hours a week, which you go, well, that's only 5 hours a week. That's not a big deal. I only read for 5 hours a week, or became self-educated in that time for 5 hours a week. Well, what happens if you do that, let's just say, for 50 weeks of the year? And you start actually looking at that and saying, well, 50 weeks of the year, if I added 5 hours times 50 weeks, right? Then we start to get to this 250 hours, right, of self-education. And you can start seeing this and start saying, what would happen over the course of 5 years? What would happen over the course of decades? See, greatness doesn't strike people in the middle of the night. It's not something that just ends up happening. When you look at people who are very successful, it's from a hard work over a long period of time. And so is it simple as reading an hour a day? Yes, because what happens is because you become self-educated, you'll start looking for more ideas. You'll want to spend time with people who can have same conversations with you. Those people tend to have more money. It's interesting. I had a group of doctors that were kind of higher net worth. And I said, hey, I want you to go out in the marketplace and I want you to find someone who's non-dental that runs a really successful business and spend time with them. And that's one of the things I want you to do. And by the way, I encourage you to do that. Go find someone who's non-dental. Why? Because they have a new perspective. We've talked about that before. They have a different way of looking at things. One of the doctors said, I spent time with this lawyer who owned this firm, this giant firm. And gosh, he was asking me and picking my brain, and he wanted to pay me for this and that. And the opportunities are endless to create value. And what he found was, all of a sudden he found himself in this different circle. And then who do you think that lawyer knows this guy had, probably, $50 million plus business. And who does he spend time with? What is that hour costing you? That time will you hand it to somebody else and say, well, I think I could do it. If you don't hand it to someone else, if you say, I can do it, I can mow my lawn. Imagine spending that time with your family, right? And being that intentional with your family or your spouse. One of the most devastating things to a financial life is a divorce. Not only the personal life, but financially, a divorce is completely destructive to everything you've built. What if you poured that time into your family versus mowing the lawn? If you took that same 1 hour and you were intentional with your spouse and sat down and said, this hour, I'm going to be so intentional, baby, whatever it is, right? And you can imagine what that would do over a period of time. See, successful people get this. Successful people understand this, that I would rather, right, trade my money and get my time back. See, with that time, I can grow myself personally. With that time, I can grow myself professionally. With that time, I can strengthen relationships. With that time, I can go to the gym and become financially, more fit and live longer. Money will come and go. By the way, you can't take it with you, and you only get so much time. One of the things that money cannot buy, right? You can't buy your time back. What I mean by that is you can't go buy last year. So what I want you to do is think about this, is what are you doing? Make a list, be strategic in this. What are things that I could pay somebody else to do? And you'd be surprised. When someone tells me they spent the last week tiling their floor, I can think of a lot more things, better things I can do than tile a floor. Now, look, I understand some people are in a financial position where they can't afford to do that. And I understand that. And that's not what this is about. But even those people, I would argue, they're still doing things that they can hand to somebody else. Because one of the greatest things Jim Rohn ever said is, he said, well, the guy says at the end of the day that, when I come home from work, I'm tired. it's been a long day. And so, I can't just be up reading half the night, and I've got to get a bite to eat and sit on the couch and relax and get some good sleep. I don't want to be reading up all night. And this is the guy that's behind on their promises. They're behind on their bills. They're behind on where they want to be in life. Now, you don't have to stay up all night reading, but if you're broke, if you're behind, if you're not where you want to be, it might be a good place to start. And I want you to think about that. Great leaders manage their time. Great leaders know how valuable their time is. They know what they can do in their time. They know how they can grow in their time. They know how they can affect other people in their time. And the one resource they do not let slip is their time. What I encourage you to do is think about your own life and think about the relationships you're letting slip and the health you've let slip, right? And don't say, if you're listening to this and say, well, I got all that figured out. Well, then you definitely don't have it figured out, right? We can all get better at this, right? Even if we're good, we can get great. And even if we're great, we can become better than great. I mean, we can always become better. There's always ways to tweak this. There's always ways to look at it. This is why I don't believe in the retirement model, which is basically what ends up happening is you become a slave to money because you're literally limiting what you can do in your life by what's ever happening in the investment account. And I think that's one of the biggest tragedies ever put on the American public. I think what we got to do is create a life of abundance. And one of the greatest abundances we can create is time. So I want you to take the exercise from this podcast. Right? Wealthy people know how to manage time. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking to yourself, well, I just want to be wealthy. One of the best things you can do is manage time. Well, I just want more money, Eric. Well, you'll get more money if you know how to manage time. See, it all comes back to time. Well, as I said, you get a divorce. What is that going to do to your money? Manage your time and the rest falls in place. Become a better leader. Guys, this is the key. I'm telling you, time is the most valuable resource you have. Manage it well. Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. Obviously, I put my heart out. I love this time with you. It's a blessing and honor to be with you. Like this, share it, subscribe to it, pass it on to a friend. These are things people need to hear. And it doesn't even matter if they're dental or not. Yes, the vast majority of this audience is dental, but if you've got a friend that if you've listened to this podcast enough, a lot of these principles are universal. Send it to a friend in another industry. Send it to your loved one. Send it to a spouse and say, this is something you should hear because I know it can make you more successful. Enjoy.